Yuji Itadori and Tanjiro Kamado are some of the nicest, kindest, and most gentle protagonists in shonen, period. Honestly, if these two were to ever meet, but what would happen if you put these two happy-go-lucky protagonists against each other and flipped the switches we so often see their antagonists flip within their stories? Could Yuji the demon god get a victory against Tanjiro, or would he be able to live up to his title as a demon slayer and take down Yuji? In this video, I'll be going over both characters' stats, hacks, and abilities, all in order to determine who would win and why. Tanjiro's strength and power wavers quite a bit throughout the series, with his best quantifiable AP feats for a while coming from his boulder slice as early as chapter 5, and his ability to cut upper moon demons like Gyutaro and Daki put him ambiguously above that level of scaling. Now, up to about season 2, this would mean that Tanjiro caps out pretty hard at building level, which isn't all that impressive in the grand scheme of things. However, I will say that he does get a significant upgrade in scaling based on his relativity or superiority to higher level upper moon demons like Akaza and Doma in the final arcs of Demon Slayer. Doma in particular has an ice creation feat that has been calced to require anywhere from 70 to 300 tons worth of force, putting him and everyone that scales to him anywhere between city block and multi-city block level. Now, Tanjiro never gets to face off against Doma personally. However, based on many of the fights that we see in the manga, including the Akaza rematch and fight against Muzan, I think it's fair to say that by the end of the series, Tanjiro should at least be relative to the second upper moon demon. His ability to decimate Akaza once he entered the see-through world, and his impressive showings against Muzan all lead me to believe that he should at least scale to this level of power, and in fact should likely be a bit stronger when he's at his peak in every regard. Tanjiro's durability shouldn't be too far off from his AP, considering he survived attacks from Akaza and Muzan as well, placing his durability in the city block to multi-city block range, just like his attack potency. And while the strength and durability of Tanjiro ends up being quite clear-cut, no pun intended, his speed, on the other hand, gets a little bit weird to scale. You see, on one hand, we have numerous statements supporting the idea that characters in Demon Slayer can move like lightning, or that they are lightning timers. Zenitsu, when using thunder breathing, is implied to move as fast as a clap of thunder, and Tanjiro, when doing the same thing, is just verbatim stated to move like lightning. However, we also get contradicting feats like Tanjiro getting blitzed by bolts of lightning, Upper Moon 4 being hit with bullets even after being aware of the attack, Tanjiro getting blitzed by sound-based demon arts, Kanroji getting blitzed by sound-based demon arts, and in general, characters who should scale above early Zenitsu being caught numerous times by attacks moving at the speed of sound. Initially, I just thought Demon Slayer had some trash speed scaling, but then you see the same Kanroji who actually gets tagged by sound-based attacks being able to dodge and avoid lightning within the same fight, and it definitely becomes a little bit confusing as to how fast these characters are and what the author is intending to put on display here. It shouldn't really even be possible for someone like Kanroji to be touched by sound-based attacks since she is able to dodge and slice things like lightning because of the 300 times speed difference between the speed of sound and lightning itself. Getting hit by sound as a lightning timer would be the equivalent of you being able to dodge bullets but then getting speed blitzed by a really fast baseball pitch. That is to say, it's really weird and somewhat inconsistent. However, since this only happens to her one time in this fight, you could argue that she was simply not as on guard, or that this feat is an outlier since it necessarily contradicts higher scaling that she could potentially have. And after a little bit of thought and conferring with some people very familiar with the manga scaling, that is the conclusion that I came to, that Kanroji and anybody that scales to her should at least be a lightning timer. Now, at the time these feats are being made, Tanjiro doesn't scale to them, even remotely. In fact, Tanjiro at this point in the series is pretty slow, to the point where he doesn't ever really get faster than Hantengu's sound-based demon art. But we know from later arcs in the series that Tanjiro gains power rivaling, if not surpassing, that of a Hashira, and Kanroji is pretty consistently shown to be one of the weakest Hashira throughout the series. Tanjiro also has superior showings against a stronger demon in the final stretches of the series, making it pretty clear once more that he is indeed superior to these lightning speed feats by the series end. This would place him around Mach 300 and give him a pretty solid base for his combat and reaction speed. Moving on from the physical department, we can talk about Tanjiro's techniques, and in spite of how simple he may seem, he actually has some pretty decent hacks and abilities at his disposal. Obviously, he has his swordsman skill and general level of martial arts competence, but we see that through the use of smell, Tanjiro is able to not only find the best way to attack an opponent, but he is also able to predict the movements of his opponent to the point of entering the realm of precognition. His body has to be able to keep up with the actual information he is receiving, of course, which is why we see that he can get blitz, but this ability to see slightly into the future by properly predicting movements has proven to be very useful to Tanjiro in battle. Through the use of breathing styles, Tanjiro is able to string together a variety of attacks and create supernatural effects such as after images, slightly heal himself, and amp his leg and arm strength to overclock the normal limits of his abilities. This overclocking is taken to the extreme when Tanjiro activates his Slayer mark. The first time we actually see it used, Tanjiro in his head tries to summon 100 times his normal strength, and many people take this statement very literally. However, I am somewhat skeptical of this being hyperbole. Regardless of that possibility though, the amp from the Slayer mark is very blatantly demonstrated in the series numerous times, and it cannot be denied as a useful tool for Tanjiro in battle. And when at his best in the manga, Tanjiro is able to enter the see-through world, which enhances his precognitive abilities numerous times over, and allows him to see the internal workings of whoever he is fighting. Entering the see-through world does take a massive toll on Tanjiro's stamina, but the benefits of using this form are well worth the risk. Now, with Tanjiro having been covered, it's time to take a look at Yuji to see how he compares. Yuji Itadori is a character who, from the very start of the series, is shown to be very physically gifted and someone who has a natural knack for battle. Through the use of cursed energy, Yuji is able to enhance the already insane base starting stats that he has to amp himself to some ridiculous level. When it comes to his attack potency, even early on, his feats are pretty impressive, as we know by the end of the Goodwill arc that he and Todo sit at the top of the food chain relative to all of the other students in most stats. This fact is important because it means Yuji's physical output as well as durability should scale above the likes of Panda, who was able to survive this heat wave attack from Mekamaru, and this very attack was calced to be around city block level. Considering that base Panda doesn't even really begin to compare to Goodwill Yuji, it's fair to say that Yuji scales to this feat as well. We also know pretty matter-of-factly that Panda, even in gorilla mode, is weaker than Todo. Todo is relative to Yuji at this point in the story, and this further solidifies the fact that Yuji is likely scaling above anything that Panda is scaling to. And while this in and of itself would be pretty impressive considering how early on in the story it takes place, Yuji actually demonstrates a significantly higher level AP feat by being able to damage Hanami with his base level of attacks. As a special grade, being able to assuredly hurt Hanami means that Yuji's physical output, at worst, is similar to that of a cluster bomb strike. Ijichi says as much in chapter 6 of the manga, and this in fact could be looked at as downplay of Hanami's durability when you realize that Ijichi's cluster bomb durability statement is being made in reference to your typical special grade curse, with Hanami having durability that completely outstrips curses like the Finger Bear. Being able to output this much power alone would place Yuji closer to large town level at this point in the story, and possibly higher because Hanami is not only more durable than a Finger Bearer, but he also has blatantly higher durability than fellow disaster curse spirits like Mahito, Jogo, and Dagon, who through the manifestation of cursed energy can create pocket dimensions which houses a mountain, specifically in Jogo's case, via domain expansion. We know that the inside of a domain expansion's dimensions do not have to be consistent with the outside, meaning that just because the external barrier of the domain pales in comparison to the mountain levels of size that exist within, doesn't mean that Jogo isn't actually conjuring a mountain-sized realm. When you consider the fact that a curse's cursed energy reserves are the only thing that allow for their physical showing, such as strength, speed, and durability, it becomes pretty obvious how high you could scale this Yuji, taking the previously mentioned city block level scaling all the way up to mountain level, with the potential to go even higher when you start to bring up stuff in the Shibuya Incident arc due to Dagon and his island-sized domain expansion. Now, because all of Yuji's main attack potency feats come from his ability to output power with his physical body, his durability scales directly to his strength because he is obviously able to withstand the full force of his own attack, meaning that regardless of which scale you think most accurately fits Yuji, his durability has to at least match that. In regards to speed, I would say that Yuji is significantly less impressive relative to how strong that he is, and that's simply because Jujutsu Kaisen gets a little wonky when it comes to speed scaling. Take, for example, Maki's bullet catching feat, which is calced out to be about 20 times the speed of sound in perception and reaction speed. Due to numerous statements and feats backing this up, we know that Yuji completely outclasses this very Maki in terms of speed and agility, and as such should scale to this very same feat. However, later in the story, we see that Yuji has quite a bit of trouble with a technique that only barely exceeds the speed of sound. To further this point even more, we see that while Naoya's top speeds with projection sorcery while human seem to just be vaguely above subsonic speeds, this Naoya was able to blitz and land hits on Yuji and Choso. And in fact, in this same fight, he was able to pretty casually dodge the speed of sound attack that should greatly surpass his subsonic speed statement. Now, this could just be chalked up to some inconsistencies on Gege's part, but I do think that some inverse explanations can make most of these feats make sense. While JJK characters can possibly exist in the faster than sound ranges when it comes to reaction and very close quarters speed, when it comes to something that requires you to travel long distances, otherwise known as travel speed, they could cap out at the much lower subsonic, or at best, Mach 3 statements we see from a stronger form Naoya. This is the best way to explain how Naoya, when going all out, just surpasses subsonic speeds, but can react to something that exceeds the speed of sound, thus keeping Yuji out of the hell of subsonic reaction speeds. At his worst, Yuji's ability to move and react would be similar to that of Choso's piercing blood, which is to say, vaguely above Mach 1. And on the higher end, you could say that he scales more similarly to what is calced for Maki's reaction time and goodwill, although many argue that this feat is very incongruent with the rest of Jujutsu Kaisen's speed scaling. Just like Tanjiro, there is a pretty wide range of speeds that are feasible for Yuji to scale to, and all will be addressed when I start talking about how the fight will go. Now, unfortunately for Yuji, his hacks and unique abilities are pretty sorely lacking in diversity, unlike Tanjiro in this battle. Aside from being able to punch and kick normally, Yuji's able to pull off a Black Flash, a move that amps his attacks to the power of 2.5 and allows him to essentially one-shot opponents that could outright tank his base attacks previously. While this ability is pretty useful and Yuji can use it more than any other on-screen sorcerer, it's not something he can use at will to defeat his opponent. Yuji also has Divergent Fist, which just allows him to give his attacks a second impact and throw his opponents off in crucial moments. Couple this with his ability to damage his soul subconsciously, and you got yourself a trio of hacks that almost completely rely on physicality. We also know that Yuji has a minor healing factor, immunity to poisons, and soul perception. Yuji has also shown himself to be extremely competent in the field of martial arts and a high capacity to adapt that has been shown time and time again in the story. Overall though, Yuji's physical stats are where he really shines, with him taking a hit in the hacks and abilities department. With that being said, and with both characters being scaled though, it's finally time to see who will be the victor in this matchup. Tanjiro is a matchup that I realized halfway through researching for this video would be very weird and kind of annoying to conclude. You see, when it comes to the most consistent arguments and scalings regarding both of them, Tanjiro is faster than Yuji by a significant margin, and Yuji is stronger and more durable than Tanjiro by a significant margin. The gap between these two in most interpretations gets to the point where Tanjiro is basically blitzing Yuji all throughout their fight, and Yuji is tanking attacks from Tanjiro with the ability to one-shot him throughout all their fight, which, as you could guess, would make this battle really hard to argue one way or another. Now, if this matchup was placed in, say, an equal stats environment, Tanjiro would win 10 times out of 10, simply because he has the more diverse and useful moveset. But because his attack potency is really too low to damage even more conservative estimates of Yuji's strength, things get tricky. Yuji can't land a hit on Tanjiro, and Tanjiro can't do any significant damage to Yuji, which means that for the first time in any versus battle that I've covered on the channel, the victor of this matchup solely is determined by who could last longer in a fight while exerting themselves at 100%. And based on feats, Tanjiro is taking the massive advantage in the stamina department. Not only has he been shown to intensely train for days on end without food and barely any water, but he's also shown himself to be able to fight for nearly 5 hours straight in the Infinity Castle, outputting maximum effort the entire time. And in comparison, Yuji's best feat comes from him fighting for about 3 hours throughout Shibuya, although Sukuna's presence in the story makes it so that his stamina and health was likely restored back to full midway through the night. Considering that Sukuna won't be a factor in this matchup, by all accounts, Tanjiro should be able to edge out Yuji by simply bombarding him with attacks for hours upon hours on end, forcing Yuji to protect himself with cursed energy the entire time until he runs out of stamina. It kind of makes sense for this fight to boil down to a war of attrition, considering that many of Tanjiro's victories against demons have come from the fact that he could simply outlast them and outpower them. Yuji would certainly put up a good fight, but in the end, Tanjiro Kamado would secure a victory due to his overwhelming endurance. If you want to see me cover other cross-verse battles where I put two characters or two entire series against one another, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll link my Kenpachi vs Jujutsu Kaisen video up here for all who are interested, and I hope that you were able to enjoy the video. Let me know if you want to see more Demon Slayer vs Jujutsu Kaisen content, and I'll see you in the next one.